Try to see that? Okay. Okay, this red line, we just developed this. It's not something that we use as a guide or that any states have used, but just something as a reference. If you look at the state of Oklahoma where this red line, it follows Interstate 40. It's pretty much a straight line across Oklahoma. And there are two lakes. One's the yellow, excuse me, the ones in yellow are the ones that they consider successful Florida bass lakes. The ones in green are ones that they have tried in their state and they weren't successful. And so they don't stock those lakes anymore in green. There are two. There's this one, I believe the red one up here is a power plant lake. It's about a 3,000 acre power plant lake. The water in that, the temperature of the water in that lake rarely gets below 70 degrees because it's such a small lake. There's not a lot of flow through. Like Old Hickory Lake is a flow through lake where the locks and dams, a lot of water flowing through there at one time. This is probably like a tributary lake, kind of like Percy Priest Lake, for example, where they don't have a lock or anything for the water to flow through. And the other lake is, but there's they consider that a success. We actually looked at their data. The growth rates on the bass are really not that great. In fact, they're not even as good as they are at Old Hickory Lake. So they consider that a success, but in our minds, it's as good as our lake is in Old Hickory. So if you took this line and just extended it across, this is not the way Interstate 40 goes past the Oklahoma state line, as you know, because it goes down to Little Rock and then up to Memphis. But if you just took that line and went straight across like that, that's where it would fall in Tennessee. This is where it lies in Arkansas. And all these lakes are the lakes that they stock in Arkansas that are all below that line drawn from the I-40 line in Oklahoma. As you can see, the Tennessee, it's pretty far south. It would fall. Of course, Chickamauga falls below that. And we do stock. We have Florida bass stocked at Gibson County Lake, which is one of our state lakes. Carroll County Lake is a fairly new lake that just opened up in Carroll County. It's 1,000 acres. Was stocked with Florida bass. Lake Graham, near Jackson was stocked, and then Browns Creek Lake was stocked. We have a lake near Memphis. It's called Glen Springs Lake that we stock with pure northern largemouth. There's no Floridas in that, and they all seem to be doing well. The Floridas do well in the smaller impoundments, though. They have done well. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Cox.
Yep. Are there any plans to stock Pickwick, Kentucky Lake with Florida?
Well,
I mean, I'm a little jealous of Chickamauga. They're getting all the Floridas.
right. It's interesting that you brought that up. We had a meeting last week with the Tennessee chapter of the American Fisheries Society, met with the Mississippi chapter of the American Fisheries Society at Pickwick, and their biologists are saying they're seeing these big bass in Pickwick, big largemouth bass in Pickwick, and there's no Floridas being stocked there. And in Kentucky Lake, even though we stocked one embayment called Harmon's Creek, it's about a 500 acre embayment. We stocked that with Florida bass for a few years. We've not done any genetics work. We did some shortly afterwards in Harmon's Creek, but we haven't done any lake-wide to determine if the big bass that they're catching that Rusty's talking about are Florida bass. I don't think that they are. I don't think that the Florida bass that we stocked at Harmon's Creek are impacting the entire lake to the point that that's what they all are. They more than likely it's a result of a good habitat, a good year class or two, a good spawning year class that they've had. There's a lot of good forage in all those lakes. There's also a lot of good aquatic vegetation in Pickwick and in all the lakes in the Tennessee River chain. There's really good vegetation. Kentucky Lake as well.
You didn't answer my question.
What was your question?
Are you planning on putting any Florida bass in Pickwick,
Oh.
Kentucky Lake? You gave me a
Yeah, I
long way around the biology bush, and I
Right.
don't want to hear that. I want to know if you're going to put Florida bass in Pickwick, Kentucky Lake. You'd have to stock. I mean, Chickamauga's common sense says it'll do well. You
Right.
drew the line. Chickamauga's getting $250,000 a year.
Yeah, I can say that Pickwick, probably not, just because we share that lake with Alabama and Mississippi. Unless we all three got together and said, let's put some in there, it won't happen.
We're going to have a multi-state meeting. We'll take care of that. But what about Kentucky Lake?
Yeah, Kentucky Lake, probably not either because it's such a big lake. And, I mean, it's 170,000 acres in the entire lake. And And it's doing well without it. We don't, I mean, the fish that they're catching are probably not a hybrid or anything like that. I think they're just naturally growing fish because of the habitat that they have and all the aquatic vegetation and the forage and everything. I think it's just what they call the perfect storm minus the Florida bass genes. I'm not going to say no, but I'm going to say we're not considering it this time.
Commissioner T?
I'm backing up a little bit, but this is just to clarify something for me and maybe somebody else. And not specifically related to hybrids. Say, just an existing lake that's pretty good fishing. You gave me the impression that you feel like stocking fingerlings of that same exact species is not beneficial normally. Do you understand what I said? Like, if it's a pure northern
Right.
strain lake, stocking more northern fingerlings in an existing lake, it typically doesn't have
Right, and it has
results.
nothing to do with
They
the
don't-
gene.
they don't make it,
Right,
right.
it has nothing to do with the gene so much as the native spawn, the natural spawn that occurs in there is well enough in most cases.
But in some ideal situations, at least in the short term, crossing or putting Floridas and getting the hybrid in the short term can be beneficial.
Right, the Florida bass gene is beneficial in some places.
Do we have any kind of cost per acre or to have a meaningful amount of bass? Like if you were gonna stock somewhere, do we have costs? I know that's,
The cost,
yeah, what's our cost? I mean, do
It's-
we have an estimate of what it costs, like, say, for an acre or for, I don't know. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to wrap my mind around, even if we all agree.
it's not the expense part. It's not like we don't want to do it because it costs too much money or cost prohibitive. The source is one of the issues, but I mean, it does, excuse me, it doesn't really cost our agency a lot of money to stock those Florida bass every year. So that's not the real issue. It's just where to put them, where we think they'll do best without a detriment to the population.
Thank you.
Bobby, I know we've just been doing it on Chickamauga for 14 years, but have you done any studies or anything to see if that F1 cross, it might be a little more aggressive, whatever, is it doing any detriment to like the crappie or anything else in there?
I don't think we're not seeing that.
Yeah.
No, they eat mostly, of course, they eat sunfish,
Yeah.
but they'll eat shad if they're there. If they can get to the shad, they'll prefer them.
Yeah. The other question I had is there any other state that, as far as the Florida strain goes, we could get fingerlings off of besides Texas?
Florida might oblige us with
Yeah.
some. We'd have to fly down there and get them like we're doing now. And another thing let me go back to Kentucky Lake too. When we did stock Harmon's Creek for those years, we stocked those from the fingerlings that we had brood fish at Humboldt Hatchery. They spawned, of course, they spawned the same time as everything else spawned in Tennessee. Whereas the fish we get from Texas, they spawn a little early. We go down there and get them, fly down, bring the fry back, and raise them up to stocking size. And they're bigger. They have a size advantage over the native spawn in Chickamauga. But Kentucky Lake, we didn't do that. We just put, so they really didn't have a size advantage. So we're not sure how successful that stocking would have been.
Is there any other? Sure.
When you stock Chickamauga, do you do it every year?
We
That's,
We have, except for 1 year, our pilot flies down one day and spends the night, and then they load her up with boxes of fry. They come in these styrofoam boxes. They're real tiny, like an eyelash. They're real small. And then she flies them back to at least 2 hatcheries, and they put them out in ponds that day. And then we grow them out in those ponds for about 6 weeks to 8 weeks. But we have done every year except for 1 year because there was a really bad storm for the entire week, and we missed our window of opportunity. After that, they didn't have any more fish to give us, and so we couldn't get them.
but you only did it Kentucky Lake for the 2 years?
No, we did it for more than 2. I think we might have done it for 5 or 6.
Just in Harmon?
Harmon's Creek, yeah.
Wish I'd have known that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Bobby Wilson? Do we have any questions, again, for Mr. Rust?
Can I make one other comment? we talked about the Bassmaster Classic, and it's something that Rusty pointed out in the video, and it is a spectacular event. I've been to several, but I went to the one this past year at Birmingham, and I went to Shreveport 2 years before that. It is a money maker, no doubt. It draws a lot of interest, it focuses on the state that has it. I hope that someday we can do that, but I was invited to a meeting about 3 weeks ago with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. And I thought the meeting was about the tournaments that Rusty mentioned there, the Bass Fest that's going to take place in Dayton, and then there's a college regional tournament going to take place, and another big bass tournament. And they did talk about those, but they also, and I was going to try to push for trying to get a classic in Tennessee, see what it would take. Well, that was on their agenda. That was the main reason they came. They want Nashville to be the host for a classic in either 3 or 4 years from now or beyond. But the next 2 years have already been decided, and they talked about the benefits and what a great fishing state Tennessee is, and how wonderful it is for all kinds of fishing, and especially bass, and how great it would be. And it was a real good presentation. I'm still fired up about it, but I was real excited about it. And but they finished the presentation, and they never asked anything about. They never said where they wanted to have where it would take place, what lake. They didn't ask any questions about how big the fish population. There's a lot of big bass. They didn't even ask that question. In fact, when it was over with, we were standing around talking, and I had heard that somebody had presented to Nashville people, Chamber of Commerce and people like that, if they would allow the fishing to take place at Kentucky Lake, but have the weigh-ins in Nashville, because it's about 60 or 70 miles, where Gunnersville was 75 miles away from Birmingham, so it's not like it's never been done. But they said they were concerned about the weather that time of year with the possible freezing and snow, late February and even early March. And so I said, where would you think? And then Jerry McGinnis, who is one of the owners of Bass, said Percy Priest Lake. So I was kind of surprised that he would just come right out without saying anything about or asking a question. I did ask, would they consider having it Old Hickory and Percy Priest, because they're both kind of together real close. And he said they would consider it, but they have some problems with that because they have to have the practice days and that kind of thing, and they come in and out on a certain ramp. So I don't think it's out of the question. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that they were really more interested in the city, the benefits, what they can give and what they can offer, than anything that has to do with the population of the fish. So.
Didn't we have a Bassmaster tournament on Douglas 2 years ago, or last year?
This year too.
There's another one this year.
This year too. So if I'm hearing you right, it's not necessarily economical decision so much as is you're concerned about what the long-range effects of the lake are genetically?
Well, yeah. I mean, we'd love to be able. That's another thing. We're all fishermen, and we're trained fisheries professionals, and we want to make fishing the best it can be in our state. So we're not going to intentionally not do something that we think is going to. If we think it would do good, we would do it. In other words, and we do a lot of stuff for bass. We may not necessarily stock bass, but we monitor the population every year. We're electrofishing. We do creel surveys. We do habitat enhancement and improvement. We do a lot for bass, but a lot of times bass. They kind of do it on their own with the spawning and the stocking. We don't have to do that for them. Now we can make big bass at Old Hickory Lake. We can do that. They may not like how we do it, but I mean we can put a big maximum size limit, like a 24-inch length limit on there, and I guarantee you we can get the fish up to 8 pounds and bigger. But that's not going to be what you want. That tournament people won't like that, but we can get them on there. So it's just the way we do it. And Old Hickory is, by the way, in our state, there's more pressure. Like Rusty said, there's a lot of fishing pressure. There's a lot of fishing pressure on Old Hickory and Percy Priest. Both those are number 2 and number 3. I think Reelfoot's has the most pressure per acre than Old Hickory or Percy Priest.
On your creel surveys, does it ask the fishermen if they're taking the bass home with them or whatever? I mean, I don't know many people. I mean, I fish quite a bit, but we don't ever take them home.
Right. Most bass fishermen don't keep their fish. Most people catch and release. Even the tournament people catch them, hold them in their live well, and then weigh them in and release them. And for the most part, They do a great job of taking care of them. I know there may be some of these wildcat tournaments or whatever you want to call those in the summertime that if they bring them in, they may not do as well. They don't handle them as well. But the bigger tournaments do a really good job of doing it. Bassmaster or BASS, they hold a classic in February, which is it's awesome because there's probably very little mortality from the tournament at all because the water's so cold, temperature's so cold.
Are there any other questions? Well, I think all the commissioners sitting up here would love to see bigger bass in all our lakes, but also we respect the fact that we're not biologists and that, that we can't advise you to do something that is not going to be advantageous to each particular lake. So, but I do suggest that at some time in the future that we do some testing of the bass that we have now in Chickamauga and see what it's doing to the genetic pool and how it's affecting, because it might not be something we need to do this year, but I think that if the Florida strain is something that would work in our other lakes and the temperature of the lakes and the vegetation such was supported, then obviously I think all of us up here are for it. But I do respect the fact that you're being cautious, but also respect the enthusiasm that Mr. Rust has, because it's his passion, just like Mr. Crabtree is for his quail. But as a commissioner, we have to be good stewards of our licensed dollars and what we vote on to implement. And I'm all for doing what he's asking, but I'm not doing it if you're thinking that there's a chance that the lake itself might be detrimental to it in the future. So I appreciate your cautious tack to it, but also would like to see us test Chickamauga to see just what is happening so we can, in the future, make the decision to be best.
Yeah, I think we'll be monitoring Chickamauga for a lot, just almost probably on an annual basis maybe, but we'll see. It costs money to do tests on these bass. Each one is real expensive to do a genetics test on her, so we're kind of limited on our funds there too.
Understand. Mr.
Just
Scribe?
to clarify though, Rusty, you're saying, you're not just saying the Florida strain, you're saying bass in general, you want stocks.
Well, I think it's your best bang for the buck to stock the Floridas because it increases your genetics. If you go breed a linebacker to a linebacker, you're gonna get a linebacker. More than likely, it's not gonna end up being Pee Wee Herman.
Right, but if there's a lake that's too cold, you're still saying, we need more bass stock. That's what
Yeah,
you're saying.
but like, you see where the line was drawn, and I've talked to, there's one guy out of Arkansas that has his own pond that froze three weeks out of the year last year, has straight Floridas in it, doesn't even have F1s. Now, the F1s are more resilient on temperature. He said they survived and did fine. These fish are pretty hardy. Now, what a lot of them say is it mainly affects their growth rate, but I was at a tournament I was down Friday, shot a show on Kentucky Lake Friday, and Saturday I was in a tournament. It took 25 pounds to win with an 8-pounder. Well, an 8-pounder is normally a potential northern strain. All right, I had a 6 3/4, could have been a northern strain, although he was an awful bug-eyed to be a northern strain, but he could have been. But now the week before, there was an 11 and 3/10s caught. Those are not likely straight northern strain because normally your top northerns, from what I hear, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, are normally 8 pounds. And there was a 12.5-pounder caught on Kentucky Lake last year. A lot of people were thinking it was close to the lake record. And last year, now I know guys like Sam Lashley who fishes tournaments down there every week. They said Kentucky Lake last year was the best year for the lake that they had ever seen. There was more, and when they're saying best year, there's schools of 4 to 5 pounders. There's big 10-pounders caught all up and down the lake. He told me he himself had caught like 6 or 7 fish over 10 pounds. Well, you don't see a 10-pounder caught on Old Hickory at all. You don't see I've not heard of one 9-pounder. Now, there has been a 9 on Priest this year. Priest, there's tournaments being won on Priest with 20 and 22 pounds. It does well. It's got a real hardy line of northerns in it. But the fish in Old Hickory that I see look like they are peewee herring. You'll catch a 15.5-inch fish and it won't even weigh 2 pounds. And I mean, I fished a tournament out there last fall and won one with 8, one with 10, had caught 14 in the next tournament, and every one I'm catching is like, well, that's the same fish, and that's the same fish, and that's the same fish, and they all look like brothers. And they're just, and it's not because there's a lack of bait. There's shad all up and down the lake. There's a couple of arms in certain creeks that you can walk across the water. There's so many shad in it. So it's not a lack of the nutrition. It's just like the genetics in that lake have dwindled down, or this is what it seems to me, and I'm not a biologist either. But what I am is a guy that shot 400 shows and has been fishing tournaments for 35 years and part them on the National Tournament Trail. So I've got a lot of experience catching these fish and seeing them and seeing the results. I can catch them, and I can't catch them on Old Hickory, and I win tournaments out there. Now, you can say, well, they didn't hit this year, they didn't hit. Well, they must not hit a lot for me because I own a house on the lake, I fish the lake, but I don't fish it much because I've got to produce on what I do, and I can't do it on that body of water. And I think from what I've talked to other biologists, you can't just go by that one straight line because you have certain lakes that it'll work in and some you don't. The only thing I'm saying is I think every one of these lakes deserve a chance to see these big fish get in them, and for these kids and the people coming up and the visitors coming into our state having a chance at catching them. And I'm going to tell you one thing. If I go into a state and I find out it's been stocked with Florida strain, I'm enthused. I'm enthused on going on that. I know I got a chance at an 8 or 9 or 10 pound fish. And like Bobby said, you don't have to stock every year. They started stocking in '69 in Alabama and started stocking 21 lakes heavy in 1980. Well, Guntersville, it's one of the top 10 lakes in the country, they don't stock but maybe every 3 years right now. So it's not something, once you start getting it going, it's not something you have to do every year. And, it's something that you can do, these lakes for 2 or 3 times, and then this lake over here for 2 or 3 times, and work them back and forth or whatever. And Bobby and them are going to know better how to handle that as whatever. But when they see, when the tournament fishermen see you're making an effort, and that you're starting to see, hey, this guy caught a 10-pounder, or this guy, there was a school of 5-pounders out there, even on Old Hickory, if they didn't get to 10 pounds. If you were just seeing schools of 4 and 5-pounders, by the time that BASS event shows up here, that's all it takes to daggum get people fired up, as far as fishing on this area and getting the visitors coming into this area and spending money.
Bob, let me ask you a question. Isn't it just as likely for the back cross to be a big, aggressive fish as it is to be a small, lazy fish?
Could be. Very well. We don't know that. That's one of the questions we want to try to answer.
I just don't know what we've got to lose, to be honest with you.
One question I had is, and I know we can't control Mother Nature, but could a lot of the population problems be, habitat and stuff? I mean, could we, I know they're not real easy to work with sometimes, but could we work with Core and TVA and, like say, can you, if you hold a little bit more water back during this spawning period, which granted, I know they've got to pull it down and get ready for the spring rains and all that stuff. So that has on Dale Hollow, that has a world to do with it. I mean,
it does, and we've tried to work with TVA and the Corps with that, and I think we've gotten to a pretty good compromise in place right now. They're worried about the floods, the spring floods, and how it's going to impact downstream from there. And Old Hickory Lake might change.
It's pretty stable.
My question was the habitat on Old Hickory.
Right.
Not necessarily the water and all that, but, what structure is.
A lot of lakes.
And there's rock piles everywhere. I didn't know where I was going if I hit 4 piles.
Well, and Old Hickory may change, they, for I don't know how many years, at least 6, they had to make those improvements at Lake Cumberland, at the Wolf Creek Dam, and so they had to let a lot of water out, and it was, actually the lake was warmer than Well, now they fixed that. Still got cold water coming from the tailwater and from Dale Hollow tailwater and from Caney Fort, which keeps it cold, but it might, before the water, before they started working on it, there was more vegetation. We don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but it maybe does.
Cumberland a couple of weeks ago, and where I fished a few years ago, and it was 20 foot of water, like 60.
Mhm.
And I don't know where I was going after that.
Mhm.
I remember fishing right here, because I had it on my GPS, and it was 20 foot of water, and there was structure there.
And they finally brought
And
it
it
back up.
wasn't there.
Yep.
Bobby, hang tight. We have somebody that's in the audience that's raised your hand. Would you like to address the commission? I would. Would you come to the mic and state your name, please?
So first, thank you for letting me address y'all. My name is Danny Sutton. Unlike Rusty, I don't make a living at fishing, but it is my passion. And my wife will attest to that every time I go out and fill the truck up and go. I actually work on the other side of the hill here for the Department of Agriculture. I'm in food and dairy. But I'm here today as the Tennessee Bass Nation Conservation Director for our great state of Tennessee. I'm new in this position. I've been with the Federation Nation, or what's now referred to as the Nation, for a number of years. And I wanted to present an opposing view to Mr. Rust, which is always a good thing to have, different viewpoints coming in. And I think, if nothing else, the discussions on the Florida strains have been essential to TWRA's learning, gathering, and deciding what to do with them. It is not new to Tennessee, but it is not old to Tennessee either. It is not like it is in Alabama. One of the main points I did want to make is we are not Louisiana. We are not Alabama. We are not Oklahoma. We are Tennessee. Our waters are different. Our waters, we share with other states. The fact that we've had Florida strains in Chickamauga and they have done well is a great thing. My focus is two things. One, not that fond of the idea of Florida strains being on Old Hickory at this time. Didn't say it wouldn't be great in the future once we know a little more, maybe. Of course, being a government employee, I've long since learned that there's lots of studies that have to take place before the money is spent. And I believe the study, and it is still a study, of the Florida strains that have been put on Chickamauga is at a very, very, very crucial point. The embayments that those fish were put in at this point have a very, very low northern strain percentage of purebreds left in it. Very low. They're just now at the point that they're going to start outside of these embayments where the stocking was done to check where our northern strain population is throughout the rest of the lake. And I think that is a crucial step here at, yes, 12 to 14 years later, but that's how long it takes. The other point I wanted to make, and I'm going to bother y'all a little bit more with the hybrid and the crossbred. I've spent many, many years in agriculture, and pigs were my animal of choice and cattle were my animal of choice. So, but all these animals are the same. When you cross two purebreds together, and if there's anybody on the board that knows about cattle or pigs, we know we can take a Hereford cow, which is the red one with a white face, and we can cross it with a purebred Angus, and we get what we call a black baldy, or the white-faced cow. We've all seen them on the sides of the streets as we drive across Tennessee, and the reason we see them everywhere is they hold what is called hybrid vigor. This animal holds the best of both of its parents and can be better than either one of those two alone. They can reach a point of production, whether it be maternal traits, paternal traits going to market, gleaning a high yield, making more money. We know that. Agriculture's known that for years. When you start to cross back and you do an F2 or an F3 or an F4, you can actually get a little bit of that hybrid vigor also. But hybrid vigor starts to dissipate immediately after the F1 cross is made. So as you get to your F2s and F3s and F4s, you will not go to a farmer and say, is that an F6 that you've kept back to be one of your prized brood cows? The answer is going to be no. Because once they get that far down that genetic chain, we know this is not what we want to be parenting. This is what we're going to send to market. This is a terminal animal that we're going to get rid of. And the neat thing about agriculture is it's very controllable. We can do those two purebred crosses, get those hybrid vigor out of the hybrid, out of F1, F2, F3, and we can say, nope, stops right here. We can't do that with fish, because once they're dumped in the lake, there's no going back and getting them. And I think it's very fair to let TWRA, and remember, these biologists that y'all have spent years doing this, and I think if you were to talk to the people in Alabama at their many, many years of stock in Gunnersville, they do have questions about it, although it has been a great economic boom for them. And it's been an economic boom, I believe, for Chattanooga area. We had our state tournament there last year, and it was a great tournament. We caught big fish. But there's big fish to be caught all over Tennessee. There was a fish caught on Pickwick in Tennessee waters last year that rivaled our state record. We're having our state tournament this year out of Clarksville on the Cumberland, and I'm sure we'll have guys running all the way to Dover. People have come to Tennessee for a lot of years and spent a lot of money without ever having Florida strain being part of the conversation. And I think before Florida strain is put everywhere, we should really let this genetics play out, let this study come to fruition down on Chickamauga. I want big fish everywhere too. And I actually do chase some Florida strains. I spend 90% of my fishing time down in West Tennessee. I love the little TWRA managed lakes, and the Florida strains do really good in them. But if I get one drop of rain on the way there, I turn around and come back, because they're very, very acceptable to, they get poor attitudes when the barometric change, pressures change, and we get a little rain and we get a little of this. So they are a different breed, so to speak. So I just wanted to give an opinion from bass at a state level. You know, the 300 to 400 guys that I represent, do they all have my same attitude? I can undoubtedly tell you absolutely not, because they want big fish everywhere, and as I do. But I believe our northern strains can reach a point that we get some good size out of them. I've been fishing Tennessee since I was 5 years old. My mom drove me to the parking lot in 1972, the last time the Bassmaster was here at Fisheries, so I could see the people that I wanted to be like. I think my motivations are somewhat different than Rusty's, and that's great. You know, he actually makes a living at this, and I applaud the efforts to have this happen. I only ask that he have a mutual respect to see my point of view of it. And I know that there is an economic gain to be made by it, but there's also an ecological gain or loss that could happen too, and I think that needs to be played out. The last, you know, everybody loves your department, and I've been in a couple on the Hill over here, when you're doing what they like. And if something backfires, then you're caught between a rock and a hard spot, because now it was the wrong thing to do. And that changes as time goes on, and as these lakes undulate with their vegetation and their temperatures, this all changes. I fished Old Hickory when I was a very young boy and caught, be quite honest with you, plenty of 7, 8 pound, 9 pound fish. When there was grass on it, there's no grass there now. So it's a hard comparison to look at Old Hickory as it is now and compare that to a Chickamauga or a Pickwick or Kentucky lake. These are vastly different kinds of lakes for many reasons. And that's just, I just wanted to share a different point of view. Gene Gilliland, our conservation director nationally, I believe, will also have a similar attitude that I would, there's a reason Florida strains don't exist in Tennessee. It's because it's Tennessee, and nature has a really good way of taking care of things. So our northern strain is a powerful, somewhat, we laugh all the time that they never wake up on the right side of the bed. These fish will eat each other if they decide they're having a bad day, and it's wonderful fishing. So, I just don't want to get to the point to where the percentage of our northerns that are left in the lakes are so small that we lose some of the great benefits that the northerns have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You use the example of the breeding down of cattle.
Yes.
Is there any reason to believe that sixth generation would be any less than one of the original purebreds? I mean, that's the least, the common denominator.
It is the least. What you've got to look at when you take those two purebreds, and we'll just, and I only bring up cattle because it's easy for me to talk about, and I think it's something that some people might be able to see better than looking at a couple of bass. That well-respected genetics that you get in the two purebreds, when you put them together, you get an incredible, just almost a volcano of genetics that comes out of this animal that it becomes really better than anything else could be. Once you start to dilute that back down, either back toward one of the purebreds or back toward a third breed that you might put in, of course, in the story of the bass, we're not talking about a third breed, we're just talking about two. You do get to a point that animal does not hold near the hybrid vigor that original F1 holds.
I understand that, but the worst that could happen is you end up with one of the purebreds. You're not going to breed it down from the original purebred, so I understand you're not going to keep the same hybrid, the F1, as you go down, but you're not ever going to be any worse than one of the two purebreds.
Can I?
Right.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
As far as cattle go, I've got Angus Hereford cross. I raise black baldies. And I've got my herd established. I do a terminal cross. I bring in Simmental bull because they have the bone and the muscle and they're big growth. But you don't want to keep any of those Simmental crossed heifers with that because they don't necessarily have the docility of the Angus. They don't have the maternal factors of the Hereford. I mean, they grow good. That's what they have, one good trait. They grow well, but when you start crossing them, keeping them with that cross in there to breed back, you're losing what you were doing with that F1 cross. That's just my personal stuff from the cattle. Yeah.
Which we can't do here.
I understand that, but what he's saying is, if you do it with the introduced third, you end up degrading what you want. We're not doing that. You really used to do it.
It will degrade. After a certain amount of back crosses, it will degrade. It's kind of like taking, and I've had this discussions with people the other day. If you take a deck of black cards and a deck of red cards, and you shuffle them together, you're never going to shuffle it back out. You're never going to end up with a red deck and a black deck again. It's always going to have that mix. Once you get so far away from the F1, you just don't have that hybrid vigor that you had. My understanding, what Mr. Rust and a lot of the other fishermen's real want is for bigger fish. I just don't want to get to a point that we've chased big so far that we've lost reproductive ability and we've lost survivability in cool water and we've lost the other abilities that we want the largemouth bass in Tennessee to have.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Are there any other questions for Chief Wilson? You look exasperated. Sure.
I just want to say how much I have learned during this conversation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that.
Translated, she wants to go fishing.
And from everyone who has testified. This has been very enlightening.
In that case, I've been fascinated as well.
We're all fascinated. If you got a barge, Mr. Crabtree?
I'm Ron Crabtree, and I have no special thing to bring here except my attendance. These commission meetings is pretty good, and I do retain some things that I've heard in the past. And one of the things that I remember is that Chief Wilson gave in the past, several commission meetings ago, a very complete status report on the Florida bass stocking program in Tennessee. And I would suggest it might be worthwhile to get a copy of that. And for the members that weren't here and saw that, it might be helpful. I got copies of that, and I gave it to a couple of the people that have some of these shows similar to Mr. Russ. And they were very appreciative, and it shed some light. That's my only suggestion.
Thank you, Ron. Unless there's any other questions, thank you, Mr. Russ, for coming and enlightening us on it, and we really appreciate that. And I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing process of what we decide to do, and got a lot of respect for both sides of the issue. So hopefully we can make the right decisions and do what's best for our anglers in Tennessee.
Thank you for your time.
Chairman?
Thank you, Commissioner McMillan.